June 7th, 1944. Normandy burned under a gray sky. German General Paul Hausser studied the battlefield reports with unease. Something was off. The Canadians moved with an eerie calm. Artillery struck exactly where German units had gathered. Attacks appeared and vanished, leaving the enemy exposed. It was precise, calculated, lethal. Hausser whispered to his aides, his brow tight. Who is controlling this? The answer lay far away in the planning rooms of England. Harry Crerar, born in Hamilton, Ontario in 1888, commanded quietly but decisively. Every drill, every map, every officer's move was scrutinized. Crerar did not rely on bold gestures. He relied on discipline. He relied on preparation. While German commanders searched for patterns, Crerar erased errors. While others rushed, he waited and struck with precision. By the time his divisions approached the beaches, the enemy feared more than bullets. They feared a mind they could not read. Could careful planning win where courage alone failed? February 1944. The training grounds of England were gray and endless. Rain fell in steady sheets, turning mud into a sticky trap. Canadian soldiers moved in formation, boots squelching, eyes forward. Every officer watched closely. Every drill carried weight. Harry Crerar's philosophy was clear, even if the men did not yet understand it. Discipline was survival. Orders were not suggestions. Repeating movements, checking weapons, reviewing maps. These were life-saving habits. Soldiers grumbled. They thought the exercises were endless, pointless. But during one-night exercise, the truth revealed itself. Shells exploded nearby. Men froze. Mud sucked at boots and hands. But those who had followed the drills instinctively dropped to cover. They crawled exactly where they had been taught. Some fell, but many survived. The officer in charge noted every detail, seeing which men moved with training, which hesitated. Each decision mattered. Mistakes could be fatal. Crerar's influence was everywhere, though he rarely appeared in person. He shaped the army through meticulous planning, detailed orders, and careful supervision. Maps were spread across tables. Officers argued over every inch, and soldiers learned not only what to do, but how to think under pressure. By the time they would reach Normandy, they moved like a machine, not through blind obedience, but through understanding discipline. The men carried each other through drills, helped one another adjust equipment, checked every detail, and repeated every command. Each action became automatic, saving seconds, saving lives. They did not yet know the fear of battle, but the habits formed in mud and rain would carry them through. The officers understood Crerar's purpose. Chaos killed faster than bullets. Order, patience, and careful execution saved lives. The Canadians would not rush recklessly into danger. They would survive by moving deliberately. When the first shots rang out in France, this preparation became invisible armor. Soldiers who trusted the drills lived. Soldiers who ignored them did not. Every map studied, every weapon checked, every step rehearsed proved its value. Crerar's army learned that caution was not weakness. It was strength. It was intelligence. And it would shape every battle to come.
July 1944. In a dimly lit office far from the front lines, German intelligence officers pored over reports. Maps covered every wall. Messages arrived constantly. Every movement of the Canadians was tracked, measured, and analyzed. At first, the pattern seemed ordinary. Small attacks, brief advances, quiet withdrawals. But soon the reports painted a different picture. The Canadians adapted too quickly. They attacked where the Germans were weakest. They fell back without panic. They struck again in unexpected directions. Major Weber frowned at the maps. How can an army move so freely yet stay so organized, he asked. He could not find the flaw in their logic. Every unit seemed prepared for the last, the current, and next engagement. Junior officers made decisions, yet the larger plan remained intact. The Canadians appeared unstoppable, but not because of bold attacks. They were lethal because of controlled initiative. During Operation Totalize, the chaos of battle revealed their precision. Artillery struck exactly where infantry had been exposed. Infantry moved without hesitation. Every obstacle was anticipated. German counterattacks arrived too late, misaligned, and often unsupported. Weber scribbled notes frantically, trying to predict the next move. It was impossible. The Canadians did not rush. They waited. They adjusted. They acted. It was not recklessness. It was intelligence. By Operation Tractable, the confusion had turned to fear. Orders from German headquarters arrived. Weber tried to execute them, but the Canadians were already 2 steps ahead. They had the freedom to move, yet never broke the plan. Each division acted independently, but as part of a larger machine. The more Weber observed, the more he realized the danger. The initiative had shifted. It was no longer with the Germans. Every calculated movement of the Canadians exploited German mistakes. Every retreat, every advance, every adjustment was precise. The officers in the room exchanged worried glances. They had trained for chaos, but the Canadians created order within it, and that order was deadly. Weber felt his confidence crumble. The fear of losing control became real. The Canadians could strike where they were strongest, and they could act where the Germans were weakest. Every countermeasure seemed anticipated. Every plan seemed outmatched. They did not rely on luck. They relied on judgment, preparation, and trust in their men. By the end of July, the Germans acknowledged it silently. The Canadians' initiative was under control, and that control had made them unpredictable, precise, and unstoppable. What had once been a tactical advantage now belonged to the enemy. Major Weber closed the reports. He knew that the coming battles would not be decided by numbers or courage alone. They would be decided by the mind behind the Canadians, and that mind had already reshaped the battlefield.
October 1944. The Low Countries were soaked with rain and flooded fields. Canals cut through villages, dikes rose sharply above the water, and mud swallowed every footstep. Engineers moved carefully, carrying tools, maps, and hopes. Medics followed behind, ready for the wounded. Every step through the landscape was a risk. The ground itself was a weapon. Soldiers could fall into hidden trenches or sink in mud. Water slowed tanks and blocked roads. Trees hid enemies. Every bridge could be a death trap or a lifeline. Crerar's orders were clear. Respect the land. Use it to survive. One engineer crouched over a minefield, hands trembling. He checked wires and markers, feeling the cold bite through his gloves. A medic knelt nearby, bandaging a soldier scraped by mud. They moved slowly. Every mistake could cost lives. Flooded fields protected them from artillery. Narrow dikes forced movement into single lines, making soldiers harder to target. Bridges, once cleared, became arteries for troops and supplies. Every path mattered. The Canadians did not fight the terrain. They moved with it. Engineers repaired obstacles under fire. Medics carried the wounded across slippery dikes. Each movement was deliberate. The German guns aimed high, frustrated by invisible targets. The soldiers learned patience through the mud. Mistakes punished, caution rewarded. By observing the land, the Canadians survived where others might fail. Crerar had shaped the battlefield before the first shot.
Flooded fields became barriers, canals became shields, roads became lifelines. Soldiers adapted to every obstacle. The engineer noted each successful crossing. The medic counted the saved lives. The ground tested them constantly, and the army endured. By the time the battle moved on, the Canadians had learned a vital truth. Terrain could be a weapon, but only if respected. Those who rushed or ignored it paid dearly. Those who studied and moved carefully survived. Every village, every canal, every muddy field carried lessons. By listening to the land, the Canadians gained the advantage. The Germans struggled to predict their moves. The ground had become an ally. Every step forward was proof that survival was possible. Every crossing, every bridge, every narrow dike reinforced the power of patience. Crerar's careful planning turned mud and water into silent partners in victory. October 1944. The Scheldt Estuary stretched wide and gray under the autumn sky. German soldiers dug trenches along the dikes, rifles ready, eyes scanning. They could see the Canadians moving in the distance, quiet, precise, unrelenting. Oberlieutenant Miller shook his head. Reports came faster than he could process. Every Canadian division seemed supplied, every unit in the right place at the right time. Bridges were intact, artillery was ready, infantry moved like the land itself carried them forward. He tried to understand it. They struck where they were strongest, they struck where the Germans were weakest. Even the terrain seemed to obey them. Engineers built bridges under gunfire. Medics carried the wounded across flooded fields. Supply carts rolled along narrow dikes without delay. Every advance had support. Every retreat was covered. Miller's troops were exhausted. Food was scarce. Ammo was low. Fatigue weighed heavier than bullets. Yet, the Canadians continued. They acted calmly under shells and mud. Every unit did its job, independently yet together. German counterattacks were uncoordinated. Every attempt to block them failed. Miller felt frustration turn into fear. Not fear of guns, but fear of precision. The Canadian supply lines were flawless. Their logistics gave them freedom. Their planning made them unstoppable. Every night, messages reported Canadian positions. By morning, they had moved again, always ready. The Germans could guess, plan, and fire, but it never seemed to matter. One soldier fell into a canal, another slipped on a muddy dike. But the Canadians adapted instantly. Bridges were rebuilt, troops were redirected, supplies arrived without pause. By midday, Miller realized the battle was already lost. Not to bravery, not to numbers, but to preparation, to timing, to logistics. The Canadians could continue while his men faltered. They could strike where he was weakest. They could sustain when he could not. Shells fell, mud clung, and water surged. Yet the Canadians advanced steadily. Every movement was deliberate. Every plan had a backup. Every soldier had support. Miller wrote notes in disbelief. He had fought for years, studied tactics, and prepared for battles, but nothing prepared him for this. The Canadians were not stronger. They were organized, they were fed, they were ready, and that readiness decided the fight. By the end of the day, German morale had crumbled. Soldiers no longer argued or hesitated. They simply watched the Canadians take control. The Scheldt had become a battlefield dominated not just by courage, but by minds and supplies in perfect balance. Miller understood the truth. Victory was decided long before the first shot. And in this battle, it belonged to the Canadians. January 1945. Snow lay thick over the fields near Gach. Mud and ice slowed every step. The Canadian Army pushed forward. NCO Sergeant Thompson watched his men struggle, boots stuck in mud, faces pale from cold. Every breath was hard. Every movement took effort. Orders came, and they had to follow. The men were exhausted. Some limped, some fell behind. Yet they moved together. Every supply wagon, every stretcher, every rifle was carried forward. The Hochwald forest blocked their path. Trees twisted and blocked roads. Mud swallowed boots. Every advance was a battle with the land itself. The soldiers grew tired, doubt creeping into their minds. Could they keep going? Could they survive the next attack? But the training and discipline from Crerar guided them. Even tired, they followed routines. Bridges were rebuilt, obstacles cleared, the wounded were carried. The enemy fired, hoping fatigue would break them. It did not. Each soldier pushed another forward. The NCO saw small victories, a unit crossing a flooded field, a stretcher safely delivered. Endurance became a weapon. Fatigue tested bodies, doubt tested minds, but survival demanded movement. By the lower Rhine, the army's rhythm was steady. Soldiers learned to endure. Even when exhausted, they held positions. Even when hungry, they fought. Even when wet, they advanced. The Germans noticed. Their attacks became frustrated. Their confidence weakened. Every Canadian step showed the power of persistence. Orders from Crerar ensured supplies arrived: food, ammo, reinforcements. Every step, every bridge, every frozen field proved that planning and endurance won battles. The NCO understood. It was not courage alone. It was patience. It was stamina. It was trust in each other and the plan. By the end of the campaign, the soldiers were battered but alive. Every hardship had been overcome through discipline and endurance. Crerar's philosophy had turned exhaustion into strength. Every frozen step forward carried them closer to victory. The Canadians had survived the winter. They had survived themselves, and they had shown that even the most tired army could be unstoppable.
May 1945. The war had ended, but silence hung over the ruined towns. Streets were empty, fields were scarred. Soldiers from both sides moved cautiously, remembering battles just past. The 1st Canadian Army had survived where many expected them to fail. Historians would later call their success precise and calculated. German officers reflected too. General von Choltitz remembered the Canadians clearly. "They were everywhere we were not prepared," he admitted. "They struck with thought, not just force." Canadian soldiers walked through the wreckage, carrying memories of friends lost and battles won. They had endured mud, snow, and enemy fire. They had followed plans, rebuilt bridges, and rescued the wounded. Every action had been guided by discipline and foresight. Even enemies feared more than bullets. They feared minds that could plan, adapt, and persist. Crerar's leadership created more than victories. It shaped confidence. It shaped endurance. It shaped survival. Private soldiers remembered small lessons. Check your gear, help your comrade, watch the terrain. Officers remembered trust. Empower your men, anticipate the enemy, control every movement. These habits became invisible strength. The psychological effect reached beyond the battlefield. Even after guns fell silent, the Canadians' careful planning inspired awe and fear. It was not just courage, not just numbers, it was intelligence applied steadily. And that intelligence left a lasting mark. Generations would study it. Lessons would endure. The Canadians had proven that thoughtful command could shape outcomes, save lives, and leave an army stronger than the sum of its parts. The legacy was clear. Victory was as much in the mind as on the battlefield. Discipline, patience, and planning mattered more than recklessness. Even decades later, the echoes of those winter campaigns reminded soldiers and strategists alike that a prepared mind could outlast the strongest gun.